Welcome to Mr. Dark Knight's Horror Stories. 5 years ago, my next door neighbor Charles, who most people called Charlie, told us that his 14-year-old son had gone missing. I still remember the day as if it just happened, the frantic knock at the door, his pale face and trembling voice as he explained through stuttered breaths that his boy hadn't come home. It was reported to the police immediately. His face was plastered all over missing child posters and on the evening news. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers and worry, and me and my wife felt absolutely crushed with sympathy for them. We offered to help search, offered food, comfort, anything at all, but as the days stretched into weeks and weeks into months, nothing surfaced, no trace, no clue, and eventually the search dwindled, the posters faded, and the news moved on to other tragedies. We never had the courage to ask them outright whether a body was ever found. We just assumed that after so long, the worst had happened, and like everyone else we tried to move forward with our lives even though we could see Charles and his wife Kathy were never the same. Kathy had once been bubbly and warm, always smiling, always eager to chat, but after the disappearance she became a shell of that person, quiet, reserved, her eyes often red as though she had been crying, her voice barely above a whisper when she spoke at all. Charles, on the other hand, didn't just seem sad, he seemed changed, as though something inside him had snapped or twisted. His smile was nervous, his words awkward, his presence uneasy, and while all of this could have been explained by grief, there was something in his manner that always unsettled me, though I brushed it aside because who was I to judge a man who had lost his son? Time passed, years even, and occasionally Charles and Kathy would invite us over for a barbecue, trying perhaps to pretend that life still had moments worth celebrating. But the air always hung heavy, and while the food was good, the conversation was stilted, and there was always that invisible shadow of their missing boy looming over everything. Then just last week something happened that made me question everything. I was outside late in the evening, dragging the garbage cans down to the curb when Charles approached me. He looked unusually tense, his eyes darting nervously as though afraid of being overheard, and he asked me if he could borrow a shovel. Without hesitation I went inside and grabbed my best shovel, thinking nothing of it, assuming he was doing some ordinary yard work. He thanked me quietly, almost too quickly, and disappeared into his backyard. Later that night, when I was upstairs, I happened to glance out one of the back windows which had a clear view into his yard, and to my shock I saw him digging. Not a little hole, not a garden trench, but a massive hole in the middle of his backyard, sweat glistening under the porch light, his body straining with every lift of the shovel. He's 56 years old, not exactly young, and he looked like he was struggling. I thought maybe I should be a good neighbor and offer a hand, so I grabbed my spare shovel and walked over. I called out to him, but the reaction I got made my stomach drop. He froze, looked up at me with wild eyes, dropped the shovel, and hurried over, almost frantic, waving his arms and repeating no, no, no. He told me I couldn't help, that I wasn't allowed to use the shovel in his backyard, his words bizarre and his tone almost desperate. Then he pointed at the gate like I was some animal to be shooed away. I was so taken aback by the hostility that I left without another word, though confusion and unease twisted inside me. Back in my house, I couldn't resist looking again through the window. He kept digging, deeper and deeper, and when he was done, he looked around nervously, tilting his head up toward the neighboring houses as though checking if anyone was watching. My heart jumped when his eyes locked on mine through the glass. I tried to act casual, to walk away like nothing was happening, but I knew he had seen me. After that I only dared to peek occasionally, and sure enough, much later, around 1:30 in the morning, I heard the sound of a shovel hitting dirt again. I went to the window, but it was too dark, so I quietly snuck outside, creeping to the fence, and peered over. There he was, digging under the moonlight, the sound of the shovel ringing in the night. When he disappeared back into his house, I took the chance to slip into his yard and glance at the hole. My breath caught in my throat when I saw a piece of black garbage bag sticking out of the dirt at the bottom. I stared at the back door, then back at the hole, my mind racing, debating whether to pull at it or flee. In the end, fear won, and I scrambled back into my own yard, a decision that likely saved me because only seconds later Charles returned. But this time he didn't resume digging. He wandered to the other side of the house and vanished, and I hurried back inside, my heart pounding. The next morning, the first thing I did was rush to the window. The hole was gone, completely patched up, the ground flattened as though nothing had ever happened. But his SUV, usually in the driveway, was now parked on the street. My imagination churned. Had he dug something up, taken it away in the SUV, dumped it somewhere far? Could it have been his son? The thought twisted my stomach. He never returned my shovel, and I didn't dare ask for it. He's been avoiding me ever since, though yesterday I caught him at one of his own windows, staring directly at me in broad daylight. When he saw me, he snapped his blinds shut. Now I feel a growing sense of terror, like I've stumbled onto a secret I was never meant to see, like the truth is lurking just beneath the surface of that yard, waiting to drag me into something horrible. The unease with Charles stirred up old memories I thought I had buried, memories of when I was 15 and living in our first house, before my family moved. Back then our neighbors were a man and his two boys, Eric and Todd. We hardly spoke to them, only exchanged names, and that was it. They were strange kids, withdrawn, silent, the kind who linger in shadows. One afternoon while me and my little brother were playing basketball, Todd walked over, and after a short awkward conversation, he invited us to join him and Eric by the river the next day to shoot BB guns. I agreed without thinking much of it, and my brother begged to tag along too. The next day, near dusk, the boys arrived at our door with a duffel bag and camo gear, and we slipped away without our parents knowing. As we walked, their serious expressions and silence unnerved me. When we reached the woods, Todd unzipped the bag and handed us guns, but the weight and cold metal instantly told me these weren't BB guns. Then Eric pulled one out, aimed at trees across the river, and fired, the loud crack echoing through the woods. My stomach dropped, realizing we were holding real loaded firearms. I snatched the one from my brother's hands and shoved both back into the bag, telling them we weren't comfortable and were leaving. They glared, angry, and cursed as we walked away. That night I woke up to the breeze of cold air, my window wide open. I froze when I felt cold steel press against my head and heard a whisper telling me to stay quiet. It was Todd, holding a gun to me, threatening that if I ever told anyone, especially his dad, about the guns, he would kill me and my family. His voice was flat and cold, terrifying in its calmness. I whispered okay, and he shoved my head before climbing back out the window. From then on, almost nightly, either Todd or Eric would appear at their windows staring into my room or my brother's, watching, waiting. Sometimes they would throw rocks at my window in the dead of night, and once Todd even stood below pointing a pistol up at me, laughing cruelly when I dove for cover. Those final weeks before we moved were a nightmare, and I never told my parents the full truth, never confessed the threats, only hinted that the boys were bad news. When we finally moved, I felt an enormous weight lift, but the scars of that fear never left. Years later, after college, I ended up living alone in a run-down neighborhood, the only place I could afford. The neighbors on one side blasted music non-stop, but the ones on the other side were worse, far worse. An older woman in her 60s lived with a younger woman who clearly had severe mental problems. Sometimes from my porch I would see the older woman holding her back as she screamed and thrashed, sometimes pointing at me and mumbling. It was unnerving, but I tried to ignore it. One night, though, the screaming went on and on, so I finally marched over and knocked on their door. The older woman snapped at me angrily, and the younger one appeared, shouting, "How dare you?" As though I had committed some terrible sin. The door slammed in my face, and though the noise stopped soon after, the encounter left me rattled. That night I tried to sleep, but at 3 in the morning I woke to strange noises downstairs. I listened, heard nothing, and went back to bed, only to wake again minutes later sensing something in the room. My phone in hand, I turned slightly and froze when I saw a shadow crouched by my bed. The light revealed the twisted face of the younger woman from next door, her eyes wild, her mouth stretching into a scream so inhuman it pierced my soul. She lunged at me as I bolted, scrambling out of the room, slamming the door, locking it, and fleeing downstairs where I called the police while she pounded and shrieked. The police came, restrained her, and questioned me. The older woman arrived, glaring at me with such venom I'll never forget it, pleading with the officers to release her. They said they had to take the younger one in for the night, and when they asked if I wanted to press charges, that glare burned into me, daring me to say yes. I said no, but her eyes told me nothing had ended, only begun. Now I lie awake at night, thinking about Charles and his shovel, about Todd's whisper and cold gun pressed against my skull, about the deranged woman crouched by my bed, and I realize the horror of living among neighbors you can't trust, people who smile during the day but hide darkness at night. Each time I think I've escaped, another shadow rises, another reminder that evil isn't always far away. Sometimes it lives right next door. Sometimes it peers through your window. Sometimes it digs holes under the cover of darkness. And sometimes it crawls across your floor while you sleep, waiting for you to open your eyes.